What's up, everyone? Kevin here from Skywatcher, and welcome to the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. We cover everything from what's up in the nighttime sky to equipment to helpful tips and tricks. And of course, at the end of the month, we have a special guest to talk about their specialty in the field of astronomy. Today is the last episode for March. And it is the last episode for our whole crazy solar eclipse lead up. And we're going to wrap that up with Fred Espenak, who is the master of eclipses. So I hope you brought a pen and a notepad because we're all going to get schooled. So we're glad to have Fred on. Before I bring Fred on, if you want to go over and support the channel, please go ahead and subscribe to our videos. It lets us know we're doing a good job, and we should keep doing this crazy set of episodes. We're also at almost the 200th episode. And of course, we also have our swag. You can go over to skywatcher.threadless.com and pick up all kinds of fun stuff there. You guys know the drill. And other than that, you can see us next week at the Texas Star Party event for the eclipse. We'll be there on Friday, the entire event. We've got some cool stuff we're bringing, mostly just to hang out with everybody, but we've got some cool stuff, so we hope to see you there. And if you don't see us there, we will be at NEAC and NEAF 6 days later. So it's going to be a busy April. Without further ado, we're going to jump right into it and welcome Fred. Good morning, Fred. How you doing?
Good morning. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know it's probably kind of like Christmas at your house where you're getting all the stuff ready to go and head out to wherever in the world everyone's going. So
Empty boxes and suitcases all over the place.
yes. So yeah, I've got my camera bag there. There's stuff everywhere. I'm sure it's the same place and many people right now getting ready for the solar eclipse. Now we were talking a little bit before, you said this is your 31st eclipse.
31st total.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's actually really cool though. And after seeing my first one in 2017, it totally makes sense why you would get hooked and want to travel the world and see these events as many times as possible. But I'm going to rewind it a bit because I asked the same question to everybody who's on. And that's how did you get started in astronomy in general?
Well, I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and I was visiting my grandparents at their home in southern New York. And one of the neighbor kids had a little telescope that he set up in the yard, and I got to look through it at the moon. I said, "Wow, that hooked me right there."
Mm-hmm.
But I started a campaign to get a telescope for Christmas, and it might have taken a year or so, but I got one of those little department store 60 millimeter Tasco refractors. That was my first telescope. And a couple of years after that, I saw a partial eclipse in 1963, and that was interesting. And I started reading up on eclipses then and found out how much more spectacular a total eclipse was. And I had this little golden book of stars that I started off with. And it had a map of the world that showed upcoming eclipses from the 1960s through the 1970s. And it had a map that showed the 1970 eclipse through eastern United States. And I said, wow, this is my one chance of a lifetime to see a total solar eclipse because it's occurring in the same continent, in fact, within 600 miles of where I lived. So even though this was 7 years before the eclipse, I made a note that I was going to, and a promise that I was going to go see that eclipse. 7 years later, I had just gotten a driver's license. I was in high school by that time. Convinced my parents to let me drive the car down to North Carolina to see the total eclipse. And of course, by this point, I had been researching this for 7 years and read everything I could. Sky and Telescope magazine was big on the list. And I thought I was pretty well prepared. And I got down there with my little telescope, even managed to get some photographs of it. But what I wasn't prepared for was the impact of seeing totality and seeing the solar corona. And just like many other people, as soon as the eclipse was over, I said, I've got to see another one. This can't be a once in a lifetime event. I've got to see more. And things spiraled out of control from there.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome. I know 2017 was my first total eclipse, and I totally understand it now. And I've told that to everybody who's coming to 2024 who's never seen one. And there's nothing like, I think you've probably talked to hundreds of people or thousands of people probably the same way, where it's like, well, I've seen a solar eclipse. Like, you've seen a partial or you've seen an annular, but there is nothing to the caliber of what a total is. And
No.
I don't think there's many things in the natural world that are to the level of what a total solar eclipse is like. I think it's one of the pinnacle things that as people we can actually experience. But it's pretty amazing. And it's amazing that you've been able to see so many of. Is there one eclipse out of the 31 that, or this is number 31 for 24, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you've done 30. Out of the 30 you've seen, is there one that was your favorite experience of all of them, or the most memorable one?
Well, certainly one of the most memorable ones was a 41-second total eclipse in India. But it had fantastic Bailey's beads because the sun was a tight fit. The moon was a tight fit with the sun, but I'm sort of burying the headline here because it was on that trip that I met my wife.
Oh, very
She was
nice.
she was in the same group. This was her first total solar eclipse, and she got hooked. And things developed from there. And she goes to all the eclipses with me now. She's going with me to Mexico next week for the April eclipse.
That's a very special thing. I have some friends of mine who are, they've been married for a long time, but they share that passion of astronomy. And it's a very rare thing where you find a couple that can share that kind of interest in astronomy. So you're probably very lucky, not only that she's supportive of it, but on top of that, she's interested in becoming a part of all that as well. So
exactly.
now there's a bunch of people who are watching, and of course this is a live episode, but then it will be recorded, so anybody who doesn't get a chance, you can go back and watch it. What would you, as someone who's done this 30 times now, recommend for someone who's never done it before, and what they could expect? Or I know we're getting into that window now where you better have your stuff together at this point, but if they're going to go to totality, what would you tell like a beginner?
Yeah. Well, I would say for the first timers, my general advice is to try to take the spectacle in. So much is happening during totality in not just the sun and the corona, but the entire environment, the shadow approaching, shadow bands on the ground, the reaction of people and animals around you. There's a lot to see. Don't get overly distracted with cameras and equipment, or better yet, don't bother with that stuff. If you want to, a great way to view totality is just with a pair of binoculars, and barring that, just the naked eye. Now, there are some people, myself included, that just can't resist trying to take a picture of the eclipse. Mm-hmm. And for those people then who are determined to try to take pictures of the eclipse, and it's your first one, you better have done your homework and have read everything you can about eclipse photography, watched videos on and tutorials on YouTube, and then gotten intimately familiar with all your equipment so you can set it up and take it down almost blindfolded and know exactly what you're going to do on eclipse day and have rehearsed exactly what you're going through. Even have a script with time marks of what you're going to do when, because it's easy to get caught up and forget what you're doing and really mess up badly.
Yeah, and as you're familiar with, and myself, we're both interested in observing the sun. You have to be incredibly careful with anything that is sun related, especially with optics, because you could hurt yourself with this as well, and no one wants that. You want to be able to see another one of these things. So There's a really quick question here, including annulars and partials. How many eclipses have you seen altogether?
Oh boy. Well, I've seen, I think I've been to a dozen annulars and probably maybe eight or so purely partial eclipses.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what that's 30 plus a dozen plus eight, so probably around 50 altogether.
That's pretty cool.
There are people who go to every single eclipse, whether it's partial or annular, no matter where it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go only if it's convenient or there's something unusual about that particular event. Like of course, I went to the annular last October because it was only a, a 400 or 500-mile drive for me to get into New Mexico for that eclipse. So it was
Mm-hmm.
convenient and close.
Yeah. Is there for this one in a week or so? Is it more of just convenience, or is there something interesting to you that's taking place for this particular eclipse?
Well, first of all, it's the next total eclipse. That's reason enough for
Yeah,
me.
the totals
But
always take priority.
but for this one, I for one thing, it's longer than average, being 4.5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not nearly as rushed trying to shoot bracketed sequences in a minute or two. I've got the luxury of 4.5 minutes, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the corona near sunspot maximum.
Yes.
I was fortunate enough to get to Australia a year ago, and I was on a cruise with Sky and Telescope to see the April 20th total eclipse, the last total eclipse that took place off the coast of Australia, and that was only 61 seconds long.
Wow.
It's a long way to go for 61 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
but we had pristine sky, and the corona was unbelievable. It was also near sunspot maximum, and it had the classic sunspot maximum kind of a corona, which means lots of radial streamers, 360 degrees around the limb of the sun, and several very bright prominences. So it was a very active, very interesting corona with lots of detail and structure. And I'm expecting something similar in April, but this time I won't be on a ship. I'll be on ground with telescopes tracking the sun, and I can do longer exposures and more exposures because it's 4.5 minutes instead of 61 seconds.
For those, so I shot 2017, and one of the reasons I was able to be successful with it was your website and your calculators and stuff that you've got there. I was able to figure out, here's my f-stop, here's the exposures, but I was on your website like religiously trying to figure out what needed, and I was able to do it the first time out with the solar eclipse timer app, which made timing just dead on at that
Yes.
point. But between you and Gordon's assistance, I was able to be successful in my first time out. But as someone who's doing this a second time, and my only interest is the corona, how long of an exposure would you recommend for like an eclipse like this to get that real extended, with the corona being so active?
Well, during solar max, like we're at, the corona tends to be brighter than at solar min, maybe an f-stop brighter. But the key to any corona imaging is that I can't recommend one specific shutter speed. You want to use everything you've got.
Yeah.
You want to bracket. I'm shooting. I've got an f9 refractor that I'm shooting at ISO 200. Whether you want to use 100, 200, 400, doesn't make much of a difference. Shooting in camera raw, so I've got the flexibility in post processing. And basically, I'm shooting sequences that go from a 4,000th of a second down to 4 seconds.
Okay. I'll have to try those longer exposure. I think I did like a second with bracketing in 2017, which
Yeah.
helped, but I'd like to go
And of course, with
deeper.
with really exposures more than a half a second or so, it's important then to have a tracker of some sort an
Of course.
equatorial mount that's tracking the sun, so that you don't blur the image just due to the rotation of the Earth, because it'll
Yep.
show up in exposures of that length, especially if you're using focal lengths large enough to give a sizable image to the moon or sun in your camera lens, like above 300 or 400 millimeters. You really need a tracking platform.
Um, so just this is a personal one for myself because there's some questions here I need to throw in there. So I'm planning to shoot at 550 millimeters, but I also have a 6-inch triplet with a reducer, so that'd be 800 millimeters. Do you think it'd be worth shooting at 800 for that, or is that too tight? I mean, I kind of
Um,
abandoned the idea of it being too tight and went back to 550. So
are you shooting with a full frame or a crop
I
sensor?
I do have the main camera would be full frame. So.
Well, far be it for me to give advice to others, but my refractor is 810 millimeters with a full frame.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my main camera. My wide angle Corona camera is 400 millimeters with a full frame.
Okay. Hmm.
So with those two, I'm covering a big range um, of the field of view. The
Yeah.
800 is close enough that I can get details on prominences and Bailey's beads and get nice structure on the inner corona. But at that focal length too, your
The
tracking has to
cropping.
be really good. You've got to be on a good stable mount where vibrations aren't going to blur the pictures, because you get into the range of a quarter of a second, half a second. If you're using a DSLR, the mirror slap in the camera causes vibrations. That's going to impart blurring to the images. I'm going with mirrorless cameras for this eclipse for the first time
Yeah.
to eliminate that. But that's one more source of vibration.
Yeah. I'm pretty well. The amount that the telescope's riding on holds 110 pounds, so it's pretty
Okay.
solid. But yeah, I know that was a big issue that I've seen before on camera trackers where that mirror slap is going to jiggle stuff around. I have mirrorless
Yeah.
as well, so that reduces some of that. I don't want to take up all my questions. I've got a friend, probably a friend of yours, Alan Dyer's in the chat.
Oh,
Um,
sure. I can't
and,
tell Alan Dyer anything about eclipse photography. He's written the book, literally.
yes. Hi, Alan. We'll have to get you on sometime, Alan. I'm not sure why we haven't had you on yet. Anyway, we'll talk about that. Any words of wisdom from Fred on weather prospects, which look depressing today, but what's Fred's experience with pre-eclipse weather predictions?
Well, this is Alan's question.
Yeah, this is Alan's question.
Uh, I'm trying not to look at any weather predictions until I get to Mexico, which is the middle of next week.
Mm-hmm.
And really, you can't take any of the forecasts too seriously until you get within 3 or 4 days of the eclipse.
Yeah.
And also, then you've got to look at the stability of the forecast that you're looking at. Are they consistent from day to day, or are they jumping all over the map from clear to cloudy to clear? Then you've got a dangerous situation that the forecasts are unstable, and that means you may be in for anything on eclipse day, and you really got to wait now instead of days, hours to see what's going to happen with the forecasts.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Jay Anderson, the meteorologist from Winnipeg, has a lot of links for weather information and how to use some of the weather apps and weather websites for looking at the cloud forecasts. So I highly recommend that information. But I've already seen on Facebook people getting all wound up in 10-day or 12-day forecasts, and it's too early to look at that stuff. Focus on your plans to get to the eclipse, what equipment you're going to use, and what you plan to do during the eclipse. Don't work. The weather is something you have no control over, so try not to worry too much about it.
Yeah, we went to Wyoming, Casper, in 2017, and it was downpouring like 2 or 3 days leading up to it. I mean, I've never seen it rain that much. And on an eclipse day, it was perfect. So, yeah. And if you have been in the astronomy hobby for any length of time at this point, you should know better not to trust 10-day forecasts. Like, just
Yeah.
just wait till you're within that 3-day window, and you'll get a little bit tighter. Do you advise people on getting up and chasing it? This one's going to be kind of hard because there's many large cities along the path that you could get stuck if you
Yeah.
get it.
If I do advise trying to chase it if possible, but you've got to be very flexible. I wouldn't make any plans to chase it until maybe the day before the eclipse,
Mm-hmm.
and then based on the best weather forecast you can get, and also it's got to be a clear-cut situation that you're almost guaranteed bad weather where you are and good weather where you think you're going to go. You've really got to look at the odds here and see if it's worth struggling with this whole thing. And then you've got to be prepared with a full tank of gas, obviously, plenty to drink, plenty to eat, because you don't want to rely on having to stop any place for food and beverage.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to drive as far as you can and only rely on gas stations. And in the event that you do get stuck in traffic, hopefully you're picking routes that are inside the path of totality. So in the very worst scenario, you just get out of your car and watch the eclipse from the side of the highway, wherever you happen to be.
Yeah. I'd rather see it than set anything. If I knew that it were dry, it's like just leave the gear and go watch it. Don't even worry about trying to get it at that point. Just try to see it. So,
but 2024 certainly has the greatest challenge of all total eclipses, because there has been so much publicity about it, and there are so many people heading to the path of totality. It's unquestionably going to be the most traveled and observed or attempted to be observed total eclipse in history.
yeah,
Surpassing even 2017.
yeah, because it's going through Dallas and San Antonio and a lot of
there's
major
31
cities.
31 million people live in the eclipse path.
Yeah,
Whereas 2017 it was only about 12 million.
yeah. It's going to be interesting. So, yeah, we're planning once the eclipse is done, we're not going anywhere until Tuesday morning. So, hopefully that gives some time to level out. So.
That's right.
Let's see. How far might the corona extend from the solar disk do you expect for this one? I know no one really knows until eclipse day, but
Well, it also depends how far it extends. Really depends on to a largest extent how you're viewing the corona. Naked eye versus binoculars versus a telescope. I mean, naked eye, you're going to probably see the greatest extent.
mm-hmm.
But it's the unmagnified view. But certainly with the naked eye, you should be able to see the corona, the bulk of the corona extending out, certainly close to a full solar diameter.
Mm-hmm.
You might see streamers out to 2 diameters.
Yeah, so it's going to go pretty far. And that's why we were telling people it's probably good to not just have the telephoto, but set yourself up like a really wide angle camera, not even on a tracker at that point, just 16-35 millimeter lens, and get the whole chain of planets and the whole view around you is worth doing.
Well, I like the wide angles just to get some interesting foreground with the eclipse above, whether it's people or buildings or trees or whatever, some landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that'll be cool. What's your thought on the possibility of Comet 12P being somewhat visible during totality? We got a negative bubble. It popped up. I've never seen that before.
It's magnitude 4.5 or magnitude 5.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to see first magnitude stars during totality.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you could have a little spotting scope there or a pair of binoculars. But I mean, that's sort of like going to the Super Bowl and reading a book.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it, actually.
The main feature is right there. It's the corona. Why are you wasting time looking at this fuzzy little comet? And I've heard some people try to do things like see a deep sky object like M42 or the Andromeda Galaxy. I don't know, I guess just for bragging rights, but I think it's a colossal waste of time when you've got the corona and you've only got a few precious minutes to observe it and study it and look at the structure and look at the prominences and everything else going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't
But
try to
there's a
go
lot of
out there.
publicity about that comet. The
Yeah.
news media is going crazy about this devil comet.
I've
I've
shot it
got, well,
once and
unless
it's there.
this thing is obvious, which comets are unpredictable, but in my 30 total eclipses, the brightest comet during a total eclipse that I've been to was Hale-Bopp, and that wasn't visible to the naked eye.
Hmm.
People were able to photograph it during totality, but it wasn't anything to write home about.
Hmm. Good to know. I was not aware that Hale-Bopp was visible during one of them, but it would make sense. So, well, don't do it. Just do the Corona. So, as you should be doing. It should have been a conversation, but
Well, it'll
um,
be the comet will be close to Jupiter,
yeah,
so you might want to invest 2 or 3 seconds to look over at Jupiter. Yeah, there's Jupiter. Do I see a comet around there? No. Back to the corona.
yeah, no. So that's go for that. Um, what equipment are you planning to use for this event? Is one of the questions floating in here.
Well, you might think I've got everything nailed down by this point, having gone to so many eclipses, but I was looking at the gear I'm taking, and everything is new except for my Vixen refractor, my fluorite refractor that I brought to the eclipses over the past 20, 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
But everything else is new equipment just because technology keeps on changing and getting better. I mean, back when I was started using that refractor, I was still shooting film. Of course, now everything is digital. Now I've switched to mirrorless cameras to reduce camera vibration. I've got a ZWO AM5 equatorial mount that doesn't with the strain wave gearing, so it doesn't need a counterweight, and it's very robust and stable. Carry a lot of weight. It's probably overkill for the Eclipse, but I'm in for quality here, and the technology keeps changing, so I have to up my game, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to imagine these strain wave mounts that are coming out are almost like a dream for eclipse chasers, uh, because it gives you the payload capability. They're somewhat lightweight and they hold a decent amount of weight, and you don't have to deal
Yes.
with counterweights anymore in the bags and stuff like that. So I'm sure those are really kind of nice to have. So
Yeah.
maybe one day we'll have our own. So for Skywatcher, we'll see what we've
Right.
got. But
Right. Well,
one day.
all the manufacturers are getting on board with the strain waves. I think we're certainly going to see a lot more in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I would hope so. I have an AM5 and it is a nice little mount for what it does. So I could expect to see a lot of those on the Eclipse fields this year because of how easy they are to transport.
I found the one snag that I had with the AM5 was that first of all, I'm not a big fan of using laptop computers in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there's some great software out there like Eclipse Orchestrator and Eclipse Maestro, it's just too much complexity for something to go wrong. If everything goes right, it's wonderful. You can just sit back and let the whole thing run. So I don't want to have a laptop in the field. So I'm using the AM5 just with its hand remote and just my iPad.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that that simple software with the iPad means that when the mount crosses the meridian, it just stops tracking.
Mm-hmm.
It just stops dead in the water. But I was complaining about this on Facebook, and someone proposed a clever little workaround so you can keep tracking past the meridian. So I've
Mm-hmm.
tested it out several times. So I've avoided that problem. So that's been solved for me.
That's been a common topic in the webcasts leading up to April 8th is what about the Meridian. And I've
Yeah,
had to test my mounts as well because they've got
especially in
some.
Texas, because totality is occurring during meridian transit or very close to it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be messing around with that. So I think that the solution in that case is to make sure your mount can track past the meridian and that you can go a comfortable amount of time, be that 20 minutes or a half hour past the meridian, still tracking without anything crashing into your pier.
Yeah. And I know that's something a lot of us are planning to do at the Texas Star Party event, because we'll have 3 or 4 days before the eclipse
Yeah.
actually starts, is we'll be able to set up and demo some stuff. But what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to practice on site where it is and learn if, hey, I should flip my meridian before we even get to totality and let it track through the meridian, or
Right.
if I'm okay to track past. And the
Yeah.
mounts I'm using have room to do it, but I'd like to know for absolute certain that we're good. So I don't want to find out last minute. So
Yeah.
there's a but next question is, why is the, I've never heard this, maybe you have, why is the dwell time of totality for this eclipse so much longer than 2017?
Well, I imagine what the person means by dwell time is the duration of totality.
Mm-hmm.
But dwell time makes it sound like the shadow reaches you and stops.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It's moving 1,500 miles or 1,800 miles an hour. It's just that it's 120 miles across. So it takes a while for one edge to reach you and then the other edge to come out the other side. The reason why the 2024 eclipse is so much longer than most eclipses is simply because the primary reason, there are several factors here, but the primary one is that the moon is close to perigee during the eclipse. So the moon is closer to the Earth. It appears considerably larger than the sun, and that produces a correspondingly larger shadow on the Earth. And it takes longer for that shadow to cross over you. So you get a longer time in the shadow itself.
Yeah, and I was reading somewhere that mathematically the longest eclipse you can mathematically get here on Earth, I think, is like 7 minutes and 31 seconds, is technically as long as totality could ever be. And I know there's some eclipses in the future. I believe particularly the one that's coming up in Egypt in a few years is 6.5 almost. So we're going to get some long ones in the not too distant future. So. But is the one that was in China the last probably 10, 15 years ago, I think is how long it was. But yeah, 2009. That one was pretty long if I remember correctly.
That's a member of the same Saros group as the Egypt eclipse in 2027.
Okay.
That's why they're both long.
Yes.
They share similar geometries. And the one before that was 1991 in Mexico. And the one before that was in 1973 in the Sahara Desert and most of Africa. They're all members of this Saros family. I think it's Saros 136 that all produces, at least during the 20th and 21st century, all produces very long eclipses of 6 minutes and up to 7 minutes long. And that's just a fact that they keep repeating every 18 years with the moon very close to perigee at its largest. So the shadow is larger.
Yeah. I have to imagine that totality that is 6+ minutes long, while it probably does go quick, you probably have a lot of time to sit and process what's actually going on at that point. Where
a little more so, yeah.
2017, I think it was like 3+ something minutes for 2017, at least where we were in Casper, and it was enough to be like, oh my god, that was awesome. Yeah. And then this one, we're going to be just about 4.5, just under 4.5, where Skywatcher will be. Yeah. So I'm excited about that. But for 6+ minutes, it's like, okay, I actually have some time to do things within this window at that point. So I'm sure those are pretty fun eclipses.
My personal record was in 2010. I was in an aircraft that was a chartered aircraft. The eclipse chaser Glenn Schneider had a lot to do with this in organizing the flight, and several other people that flew out of Tahiti for an intercept in the South Pacific. And that was a long eclipse to begin with. If you were in a boat in the path of the eclipse, it was over 5 minutes long. But
Hmm.
we were flying along the direction of the shadow, and we actually got almost 9.5 minutes of totality.
That's insane. So,
The downside is we're looking through aircraft windows, and the sun was quite high, so you really had to lay on your back and look up through the window to get a good look at it.
I was going to ask because I know there's a couple flights. I think Southwest has one. I think there's one from Delta that has stated that they will be flying in
Yes,
totality. But I always wondered about those flights, unless you were in. I think there were the two planes in 2017 that had the standard military cockpits where they could actually view the whole thing.
right.
But from an average plane, I can't imagine. It's probably cool to see it from the air looking down, but I can't imagine it's a great view of the actual event itself because of
Well,
how
naked eye
popular.
is okay, but it's a challenge to do any kind of detailed photography from a plane
Yeah.
because no matter what you do, the windows are going to cause some kind of distortion of your images.
Yeah, they're
And you've
not
got the
optical
plane
very.
vibration to deal with. Aesthetically, it's not as pleasing because on any kind of jet aircraft, you're listening to an awful lot of noise
Hmm.
from from the engines. So it's not the environment I prefer for doing an eclipse.
Yeah. And there's something, I know you understand this and anybody who's seen another one, but there's something to be said about um just the atmosphere of being present in totality, from the temperature changes to seeing all the shadow bands and the
Yeah.
crescents coming through. So there's a lot that you have to experience. And I know we here in Phoenix, we had a really deep partial back in October from the annular, and it was deep enough to where the colors started to get muted and you could see the deep crescents coming through the leaves and stuff like that. So you got a little bit of a taste of what it would be like to start to
Right.
venture into totality. But if you're in a plane or a vehicle, you don't get all these other very ethereal pieces of the eclipse that's part of that experience.
That's right. I would save a plane for a trip where it's impractical to see it from the ground, or the weather prospects are just so dismal from the ground that the only realistic option is for a plane.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, a flight, they did a flight over um, the Antarctic Ocean for the 2021 total eclipse that clipped some of the islands off the coast of Antarctica.
Hmm.
That kind of a flight made a lot of sense to me, even though I didn't do that one.
Yeah. Right tools for the right trade. Let's see. There's a couple questions in here building. We did the plane one. Oh, another little comment from Alan. Everyone must get Fred's great book, Totality. It's new for 2024 edition. It's a must have for all Eclipse lovers. So go get Fred's book.
Thank you, Alan.
Here's another one. It should be an easy one for you, but will a Lunt imaging show any beads or totality? I'm assuming you're particularly asking, will a hydrogen alpha solar filter show you anything? I know the answer to that, but I'll let you elaborate on that as well.
Well, yes, you can see Bailey's beads through a Lunt telescope, um, but it's a different kind of a view than a white light image, because in white light, and seeing Bailey's beads versus photographing it are two different topics. Um, Seeing them is a dangerous option, and you've got to really be experienced and know what you're doing. I'm not even going to attempt to try to explain safe ways to do it, because some of it's just intuitive and experience. But photographing it, the beads can be spectacular photographing it with white light, but then you're not directly viewing the event. You're using a camera to capture it. You can see the beads certainly through a Lunt telescope. Now, I've never done that, and it's an interesting thing to try. I've just been too busy with other options during the eclipse to do that. You
Yeah,
can't do everything.
yeah, that's something that you might just have to be the one that pioneers that. If you've got the gear and that's how you want to spend the time of Bailey's beads, go for it. So I don't think
I know
there's any.
that the Belgian astronomer Patrick Poitevin has done this at a couple of recent eclipses. Observed. In fact, he's gotten to the point where at the last total eclipse, he actually positioned himself a couple of kilometers outside the path of totality, just so that he could watch the Bailey's beating phenomena through a Lunt telescope or through an H alpha telescope. I don't know what brand it was.
Mm-hmm.
And he raves about the experience.
Hmm. We'll
You
have a
can't
few
convince me, though,
hydrogen.
I'm going to be in the path of totality.
Yeah, no, I remember talking to a few people back in 2017 or just after, and they're like, yeah, well, we were at like 98%. It's like, oh, that's worse than just not seeing it at all, because you made
Yeah.
98% of the effort and you just couldn't go that little bit. Like, that's
Yeah.
probably just a couple miles of a difference at that point. So, oh, there's a bunch of them. Are shadow bands very obvious? I have seen people's videos. The bands in these videos look so faint. Any way to capture bands with more contrast?
Shadow bands are very unpredictable, and the contrast of them is unpredictable. And just for your listeners, shadow bands are an atmospheric phenomenon that take place usually a minute or so before totality, and maybe in the minute after totality, when the sun is an extremely thin crescent. It sort of acts like a narrow slit shining through the Earth's atmosphere. And as the light passes through different temperatures and different densities in the atmosphere, the light beam gets bent or refracted, and it produces these patterns on the ground that look like the ripples on the bottom of a swimming pool, moving very rapidly.
I never thought about that way.
But they're heavily dependent on the quality of the atmosphere. If you've got any kind of a haze or cirrus clouds, that tends to kill the shadow bands or even render them completely invisible. They're best seen if you've got a crystal clear blue sky and a good surface to look at them. Some people spread out like a white bed sheet or something like that. And they're challenging to image, but with modern cameras, it's getting easier and easier. I've seen people getting decent videos of shadow bands with cell phone cameras now.
Yeah, I didn't see. We did see them in 2017 in Casper, but we were also on grass, so I think that helped kind of diffuse
Yeah, that's going to
some of that.
diffuse them.
So
Yeah, white surface, a concrete sidewalk or parking lot, or even the hood of a white car is going to show up shadow bands better than something like a grassy field.
yeah, so that would be a trick, is you want a light surface. We might have to
Yeah.
stop and get just a sheet to try that out, because
Like
we'll be
pick
on
up
a
a bed
grassy
sheet at Walmart or something.
Yeah, there you go. And you can pad your telescope on the way home. There you go. So,
Yeah.
or if you're stuck in traffic, you can go to sleep. So I'll have to give that a shot, because I love the little pinhole effects through the trees and little crescents and stuff like that. And of course, using the strainers are a great way to make like a pinhole. But yeah, the shadow bands was something I didn't get a good look at during 2017. So I'd like to try and see them more here. So I guess we'll have to try that.
I've seen them at a number of eclipses, but for me, they've always been a secondary thing.
Yeah.
Like something yelled shadow bands, and I look it down and, oh yeah, there they are, but the corona's here.
Yeah.
Back up on the corona.
Yeah. Let's see. Do you use a service for setting up your trips outside the U.S. locations? Any concerns on security in locations such as Mexico?
Oh, sure. That security is always an issue. I've been working with a travel agency called Spears Travel for certainly 25, 30 years. And I know the owner of the company. We spend years planning our trips. Security is always a high or at the top of the list, because we're typically bringing 50 or more people with us from all over the world, and you don't want to minimize or downplay security for the people going on these trips. So that's always a high concern, and it plays into where we're going for the eclipse. I mean, you want to go someplace where the duration is as long as possible. You want to go someplace where the weather prospects are as long as possible, but you want to go someplace where the logistics of getting into an international airport are realistic, where the accommodations are realistic, and where security and safety are going to be reasonable for a group of Americans or whoever they're coming.
That's a good way to look at that. So yeah, if you're planning
All
on
of
doing
these are
the,
factors in planning the trip. It's not just one thing.
yeah, I know it's really easy. I do this all the time. It's really easy to get stuck in, okay, I've got my equipment together and that's it. No, there's a lot more, especially during an eclipse trip. There's a lot more logistics than just the equipment's the easy part. Um, your logistics should be the difficult part, especially if it's international. So
Yeah.
there was one I skipped here, not on purpose. I think it's in the chat here. Where did it go? What's the slowest shutter speed you can shoot at using a wide angle lens where there would be no blur? He won't have a tracker, but he will have a tripod.
Well, that depends on how wide angle a lens he's talking about.
Correct.
If he's talking about, a super wide where you're taking in 50 or 60 or 70 degrees of the sky, then you can certainly go 5 or 10 seconds.
I would look up you could do the 500 rule. Just look that up, and that'll give you a rough idea of what obviously there are people who would tear apart the 500 rule, but look up the 500 rule for photography, and that's just a good small calculation to give you a rough idea of what to work within. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very similar to shooting the Milky Way at that point.
Exactly.
So you want to look up the 500 rule, but you're going to have to be aware of what your focal length is going to be. That will dictate everything, because the longer the focal length, the less time. So,
and then of course bracketing is your friend. Shoot an exposure that's twice as long as you think. Shoot an exposure that's half as long or a quarter as long as you think. Shoot a range of them. You've got 4.5 minutes.
Yeah, mess with it. So don't be, and it's all digital. So if you mess up, you just delete that one or keep it.
Set your camera at bracketing and just fire away.
Yeah, get some really good memory cards. That's another one. Any app recommendations for calculating shooting times?
I assume they mean by that a pre-programmed kind of a thing.
I guess so. Because there's shooting times as far as like when you should take filters off, and that's solar eclipse timer. Yeah. Exposure times, again, this all comes down to what's your F ratio, what's your focal length.
Right.
Your optics will dictate what your exposures are going to be.
I mean, my MrEclipse.com website has a page on solar eclipse photography, how to shoot a total solar eclipse. And there's an exposure table in there. I think sometimes people put a little bit too much credence and weight on that exposure table. It's only meant as a guide, because seriously, you can't predict exactly how bright the corona is going to be from one eclipse to the other. The corona doesn't have a sharp edge, so when I give an exposure to get the corona out to 1/4 of the sun's diameter, that's just an estimate. It's not a hard, fast rule. And the bottom line is, if you're trying to shoot a range of images of the corona, you got to be bracketing anyway, in which case an exposure table doesn't matter. You're just going to shoot. I mean, I'm shooting everything with my setup. I'm shooting at f9 at ISO 200. I'm shooting the corona from 1/2000th of a second down to 4 seconds. So it's a no-brainer. What's the right exposure? Everything is the right exposure. Each one is going to capture a different part of the corona. But if you want to get a rough idea of how deep into corona you're going to get, you can look at that exposure table. But on most modern cameras, they have settings for bracketing. And for shooting corona, you want to be shooting bracketed sequences. And the easiest way to do that is to set your camera on auto bracketing for as many stops as the camera allows. Some of the less expensive cameras you may only be able to bracket 3 stops. A lot of the Nikon cameras, which I favor, go up to 7 or 9 stops. So you can cover a wide range there with that without messing with your camera. You set it up on bracketing and you just shoot, and it gives you a whole range of different exposures.
And then you can go
In
through
terms of the
afterwards and pick
timing,
them.
that Gordon Telepun's Solar Eclipse Timer app is a great app to give you time signals of what's happening when during the eclipse, and when it follows the progress of the partial phases and how long the eclipse is at different steps of the eclipse. And then there's of course totality, where it gives you time steps of when to take the solar filters off, when to put them back on. And during totality, you're just going to be shooting bracketed exposures to get a wide range of exposures. And really, any shutter speed you use is going to get some kind of image of the corona. You just want to make sure that you're in good, sharp focus and that you've minimized vibrations on whatever kind of a camera that you're using. A tracking mount there helps, especially if you've got focal lengths longer than 200 or 300 millimeters, and you want to start pushing exposures more than a half a second or a second. Then the tracking mount is really important.
Yeah, in 2017, when I was getting ready to do this and having never done it before, I went to Fred's website and just kind of found I had already picked whatever optic I was going to use. It was a telescope, so an Esprit 100, which is f5.5. So I was locked in on my f ratio, so that wasn't going to change. And then I just picked an ISO and said that's not changing, and then left everything up to the exposure to start somewhere. So I figured on Fred's chart, was like, okay, I want to shoot this event. I need to start at this exposure speed and then bracket upwards from there. So that's how I found that it worked best, is to just get rid of 2 of the 3 major variables in the camera by picking your f-stop and picking your ISO start point, and then auto the bracket from the starting exposure and go up. And that worked out for me.
That's
600
exactly
exposures later. So there's a couple little things and we're almost done. Let's see. Recommendations on intervalometers or automated shooting options.
Well, for automated shooting options, of course, you're really talking about most likely using a laptop in the field. And if you're a Windows user, then you're talking about Fred Brunge's Eclipse Orchestrator, which is a good program. It's a little late in the game now, because you should have been using that software for the past month and testing it and debugging and working out a script to shoot the sequences. But I guess it's better late than never. So that's one option for Windows platform. For the Mac platform, there's Xavier Joubier's Solar Eclipse Maestro, which is a very nice program. The negative side of that program is that he did not upgrade the software when the Mac OS changed from 32 to 64 bits. So it doesn't run on modern operating systems. It runs on, I think Maverick might be the last operating system, which is like 6 or 7 or 8 years old. So you've got to have an older laptop running Mac OS to use that software. It's great software, but that's I would say those two. There are a couple of other options out there. I don't remember the name of this software, but there's a fella out there that has a program that runs strictly on Canon cameras. I think it's on Windows platform. So there are a couple of other options out there. You need to do some Googling to look at automated Eclipse software for that. And then you really got to test it and make sure it runs with your equipment, and practice before the big day.
Yeah, I kind of found that a $30 intervalometer from Amazon was probably the simplest method, and just start with like we said earlier, what's your f-stop, what's your ISO, and then pick your exposure and just use the intervalometer to trigger it. And
yeah,
way easier. I just don't trust but I haven't sat and done the automated stuff myself, and I would just rather have full control of the system rather than a computer doing it.
Yeah, my nightmare with a computer in the field is is number one, the old bugaboo of astrophotography. There's something wrong with your USB cable. Get a new
Oh
USB
my
cable.
God, the USB.
You know, number one. Number two, oh, it's time for a system update in the middle of the eclipse.
Yep. Yeah.
You've really got to have a lot of confidence in your computer gear and know that inside and out and be able to disable any of those types of features and make sure you have no cabling problems if you're
Yeah.
going to go to the laptop during the eclipse. And people use them to great success, but I'll bet you they've spent a lot of time setting their equipment up and practicing and rehearsing and debugging and making sure they've got a good script for their software to run during totality.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. There's a couple more. My main scopes will be full frame cameras on a TV85 and an astrophysics stowaway under automation. The third is a crop sensor Nikon on a 420 millimeter focal length. The question is to put a power mate in it or not. I don't know that I would, but that would be my.
I don't think I would. It sounds like you've got a good range of focal lengths right there. And anytime you introduce more glass, um, it might be fine, but you might be introducing more problems than it's worth.
Yeah, so I'd keep it lower. You can always crop with the megapixels if you want to get higher in there, but I wouldn't add any more glass if I don't have to.
Yeah, and it slows down the optical train as well.
Yeah. Joining the stream late, has there been any discussion on focusing? What would be your recommendation for getting focused?
Well, I know a lot of modern cameras have um, articulated screens that you can bend up at a convenient angle to look at your image on live view, or if you're using a mirrorless SLR, you don't even need the live view feature. You've always got a view on that screen, but you really need some kind of a shroud, a black T-shirt or something to throw over your head because it's hard to see that screen in bright daylight, especially when the telescope is pointed up at the sun. I'm a big advocate of right angle finders that I can pop onto the viewfinder and then look into the viewfinder, and that produces its own shroud. I get a nice bright image. I can zoom into the image either with a 2x switch on the right angle finder or by zooming in on a digital image with the camera itself. And then I'm using sunspots for focusing. And we've been lucky the last couple of weeks. There's been a lot of sunspots. Hopefully we'll have some good sunspots on eclipse day. If you don't, another option is to look at the edge of the moon where it's intersecting the sun, because that produces a very nice sharp edge to focus on, especially when you get close to the crescent phases. And don't focus your equipment at the beginning of the partial phases and leave it. Check it several times as the eclipse progresses, and make sure you can do a final check at least within the last 10 minutes before totality. Make sure you've got that good focus locked in. And if you've got whatever instrument you're using, I always use a little bit of duct tape or masking tape or gaffer's tape to tape down my focusing ring so I don't inadvertently twist it when after I've made my final focus to secure it from changing in the last 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, blue painter's tape is a good one if
Blue
you don't want to resonate. Yeah. I've got a whole roll in the palette now. So, let's see. Last question. Then we got to let Fred go here because it's been an hour. Is the temperature drop quite obvious, and does the wind pick up during eclipses?
The temperature is quite obvious. Usually it's 8 or 10 degrees or more, especially in the last 10 or 15 minutes, you start to notice it most. The wind, sometimes a wind picks up, sometimes it doesn't. You need to talk to meteorologists more about that.
I don't remember a breeze or anything. I remember the temperature drop in 2017, but I don't remember any other atmospheric phenomenon happening at that point. But
a lot of variables there.
All right, guys, that's an hour right there. I know we could keep Fred all morning, but he's got an eclipse to get ready for, and so do the rest of you. Fred, thank you very much for hanging out with us this morning, and I hope your eclipse trip goes well. If you guys want to learn more, you can go to, it's mreclipse.com, correct? So,
That's right.
you can get over
Thank you,
to
Kevin.
his, yes, thank you. Head over to Fred's website if you want to check out more, and if you're going to the Texas Star Party event, we'll see you there. Other than that, have a safe eclipse. Next week, we will not be here, obviously, because we're going to be at the eclipse event. So it will be a pre-recorded episode. So we will see you guys back here in 2 weeks for another live episode. So clear skies. Have a good new moon weekend, a week from now. And good luck on the eclipse. So thank you very much, Fred. And we will see you guys in a couple weeks. Take care.
Clear
Happy
skies.